So if you're new to Trinity Church, today is going to be the first part. You're like, oh, okay, singing, great guy, great worship, I get it. The second part might seem a little strange because you might be expecting something different. Depending on your background, you might have expected a bunch of sitting and kneeling, and we're definitely more casual than that. But even if you're kind of used to more the modern kind of version, you expect a full-on sermon. But it's going to be a little bit different. Actually, the next 4 weeks are going to be very different. We just came out of a time where we did teach through what the DNA of our church is, what it really means to be a disciple, a follower of Jesus Christ. And we talked about discipleship in terms of Jesus' call to follow me and I will make you fishers of men. We talked about that being the DNA of discipleship. And the first step is to decide to follow Jesus. There's a point where as you get to know him, you learn to trust him and you surrender him and you decide, I'm going to follow. Now, none of us do that perfectly. Matter of fact, we're not even halfway there. Maybe not even a 10th way there. But it's a decision made. And then Christ does something in us. And he begins what we call the new of the DNA, the new creation identity. He makes us new, but it takes us a while to catch up with what he's doing. And he begins to do that in us. And the result is someone who knows God, loves God, is not the same person anymore, and then begins to share that with others. That's the A, they act like a minister of the gospel. We begin to share that hope with others. It doesn't mean we have all the answers. It doesn't mean we're particularly good arguers. We have all the little, but we can share, hey, we found hope, and we share the hope with other folks. And every year we take some time and we just think about how are we doing on that mission? How are we doing on that mission of spreading that word of hope to other folks? And what are the different ways that we just kind of challenge ourselves to do that and then hear stories? And so today's there'll be a little bit of, we'll go into the scriptures, but also we want to hear the stories of what God is doing in and amongst us as we kind of stir that. So the primary question we're going to ask ourselves in the next 4 weeks is, where are you leaving his fingerprints? Where are you leaving his fingerprints? Right? Now, most of you probably have or have had or at least familiar with the TV and all the multiple crime and law and whatever kinds of different shows there are out there. And one of the keys, right, to knowing that somebody was at the scene is prints. The interesting thing about our unique call as disciples, though, is that God doesn't call us to leave our fingerprints. He calls us to leave his fingerprints. He uses us in ways that after we've been somewhere, after we've done something, people might say, yes, Joel was there. But if God's used me, they'll say, God was here. He used Joel. He used Jim. He used Eric. He used KK. He used Terry. But God was here. And so that's the question that we're asking is, where are you leaving his fingerprints? And so today I'd kind of want to start, you could say maybe in an unusual place. Matthew, who was one of the disciples of Jesus, writes a letter to let folks know about Christ's life. And then there's this short little kind of summary verse that as he begins to transition into Jesus' work with the disciples at the end of chapter 9. Now, when Matthew wrote his letter, it was one long letter, had no chapters, numbers in it. But so we can find our way around it, we've put chapters and verses in so we can find the right place. So we're in Matthew chapter 9, 35 and 36. And this is one of those messages you're welcome to write notes if that's really what you want to do. But it's not going to be overly complicated, I guess. It's pretty straightforward. I think you can just open up your heart and kind of receive this. And this is what it says in Matthew 9. It says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues. Synagogue is kind of if you were the word for a Jewish church. It's kind of for your mind's sake. Preaching the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. When he, being Jesus, saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Now this process begins in this verse where Jesus makes an observation. And there's several things that he notices. First of all, one of the things he notices is the number of the sheep, the number of people there, it says he looked at the crowds. He saw the crowds. And one of the things that we want to do in this process is open our eyes. We, especially here in the Bay Area, we get so focused on getting from point A to point B and getting done what we need to get done so that our 401k is successful, our children are successful, our marriage is successful. And we usually, don't have time really to breathe and look at the crowd and notice the world. And yet Jesus, in the midst of all this hecticness, takes a moment, steps back, and he sees the crowd. And he notices their condition. It says that their condition was that they were harassed and helpless. The interesting thing is that you might think harassed must have been the government, right? They were under Roman rule, and it was not it was a very oppressive government. But that really, if you read the context of Matthew, you'll find that's not really where the harassment really is coming from. For the most part, the harassment's coming from the religious. It's coming from those who are kind of pointing down on them and saying, you are a mess. And you need help, and you should feel really bad because you're not improving. They were harassed. And the interesting thing is the helpless is they couldn't argue with that assessment. They were helpless. They didn't have the education. They didn't have the willpower. They didn't have the ability, if you would, to change that state. So Jesus knows there's a lot of people who are harassed and helpless. And he makes an observation about the reason for the condition. And he says, because they were sheep without a shepherd. That there was actually help for them, but they didn't have the proper leadership. And the interesting thing is, even though they had religious leaders, Jesus did not acknowledge that as proper leadership. He says they need a different kind of leadership. They are sheep without shepherd. They are lost. And if we had grown up in a rural environment, you would understand how much sheep need a shepherd, how picky they are, and how unsmart they are. And when the Bible calls us sheep, it is not flattering. But the interesting thing is the effect. As Jesus notices the crowds, he notices their condition, he notices what the problem is. The effect on him is compassion. Compassion. So one of the things we want to do is we want to open our eyes and observe the crowds, their state, their lack of shepherding, and hopefully God will do something in us and develop compassion. So I'd like to do that by inviting a team that has kind of stepped out in faith and followed the Lord in an area. They went down to Grace Children's Home. So that team, if you guys will come on up. We have the blessing and the honor often to send teams to different parts of the world. One of the places that we go every year, we've gone several years, even before I started here, is down to Mexico, to the Grace Children's Home. I forgot to grab the microphone. So, Kevin, we'll just start with you. If you just kind of give us a thumbnail picture of Grace Children's Home and what they do there.
Okay. Grace Children's Home was started about 11 years ago by a couple from the U.S. who God laid it on their heart that for these kids in Mexico that Stephen will likely talk to later, there is no state government foster care system. And so if your parents die, your parents are in jail, or your parents just can't afford to take care of you, you become an orphan and you have life on the streets. That's your reality, and it's a brutal life. And so God laid it on the hearts of this couple to start this home, not an orphanage, but a home where this would be pretty much these kids' forever home, where they would come, and they've got their house parents that live there. They've got their whole big family. It's great to be looking out over the whole soccer field and watch the kids out there playing with all their brothers and sisters and seeing them grow over the years. It just is a very, very safe, very loving, very God-centered environment there.
And do you have any sense of the number of kids, both in the home, but more importantly, in need of a home like that?
in terms of the kids that are in the home, there's probably about 15 boys, 15 girls. The older ones are starting to actually graduate out and are going to either college or a technical school. They've got a few younger ones that are coming up. In terms of the ones that are out there, it's countless. I mean, Scott has go to so many orphanages all throughout Mexico, and it's millions of them.
All right. If you guys will just kind of share a little bit then about your experience with Grace Children's Home and kind of the impact it's had on you personally.
Well, I've been at Grace Children's Home 3 times now, and each time has been quite different, depending on what we were doing. We always have some type of work project to do, but we also have time to interact with the kids, and I really like doing that and finding out what are they doing. I talk to the 2 people that are going to college and ask them, what are they studying, and get all the details on that, and usually play some soccer. That's really easy to start a soccer game there. And just basically showing care by interacting with kids. And they really appreciate us being there. They really show that. And they had a movie night this past one, kind of a movie night for all of us volunteers and them together with pizza. That's something they do on a lot of the trips. So I consider myself kind of a compassionate person. That's one of my gifts. So a reason that I'm there, and I've been on several other mission trips with other churches in Mexico, and like I said, I have really compassionate heart for kids and their well-being and stuff like that. So he just reminded me the foster care thing. We talked to the director there and found out, at least I found out something I didn't realize before. There's no foster care system in the country of Mexico. And Grace Children's Home wants to convince the country of Mexico to start a foster care program, and they want to be a pilot program at Grace Children's Home. So right now they have like 4 different people that are outside people are coming in and writing a proposal for how to do that. And they have a lawyer also that's going to present this to the government. In the state, I think Kevin already explained, you turn 18, you can leave. Or if you're lucky, you decide to go to college and someone sponsors you. Otherwise, you're leaving, you don't have any family outside, you don't have a fallback, and you're going to try to make it on your own. That's just not going to work for 99% of those people. So that's why they've come up with this idea, and they're going to try to pull it off. They're going to need a lot of God's help and prayer for that. That's a monumental task. And so I ask all of you to pray about that.
This is my first trip to Grace Children's Home. It's a wonderful facility. They begin to reach out to children that are very young. I think maybe newborn is the youngest child that's there in a separate facility, distinct from just across the street, essentially, from the home that we spent most of our time in. But Steve and Kevin and Greg and Glenn had all been to that facility or similar facilities on numerous occasions. So it was an educational experience for me. Stephen mentioned one of his gifts as compassion. One of my gifts is mess making. So fortunately, there were a number of guys that went with us from Westgate Church that were all very skilled in construction skills, and working together, we were able to get quite a bit of work accomplished, which was a tremendous blessing. And not only did we have an opportunity to reach out to those that move in that community on a regular basis, but we had opportunities to interact and reach out to each other, which was a blessing as well. So overall, it was a tremendous experience, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity, which you folks made possible.
Amen. So you just kind of see firsthand, first of all, a group of guys that ultimately are moved towards compassion. You may first go down because someone keeps asking and asking and asking, and you finally say yes. But there's a huge need, and you have kids that they understand that they are helpless. And in a lot of ways, in our society, they're accosted. And so it's a huge impact on those that are there, that these guys are moved in that kind of way. So could you guys give these guys a hand? Thank you. I also say, my wife and I got a chance to go down several years ago where they were just celebrating what God had did there. And many government officials showed up because they have a unique relationship with the government there. And the government sees what they're doing as a model for the country. And so it's amazing not just to be, there's a lot of that kind of work, but God, by His grace, has really allowed us to be part of some unique works that have a lot of influence beyond just, yes, they're caring for kids, but they have the kind of influence where they're beginning to dream about how can we help the Mexican government, that country, help its own. And it's just a phenomenal thing to see. And so as Jesus makes this observation, He does propose a solution. So right after He makes this observation, He says, starting in verse 37, He says, "Then Jesus turns to His disciples." Right, so He sees the crowds. He sees that they're sheep without a shepherd. It moves Him to compassion. But then He turns to His disciples. And He says to them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into the harvest field." This is His solution. Now, as He breaks this down, what He's saying is the harvest field is the world. It is the world that we live in, and He wants them to see that. And He talks about this harvest field, and He says, first of all, the very fact that He addresses it says that these people have worth. They are precious. And so we don't see this a whole lot. Maybe sometimes you see it with someone who's sitting down at the store when you come out. You can kind of see the need and the brokenness. But the truth is, most of the world is filled with very poor people who get very little help and really feel like no one cares. And in a lot of ways, the people who should care really don't. Their own government, their own community really don't care. And here Jesus, by the very fact that He addresses His disciples, He doesn't just let what I see go. He says, He addresses it. He shows them that they are worthwhile. And He says the harvest is plentiful. He points out what we know is true. And that is there's more people that are broken. There's more people that are helpless. There are more people that are being accosted than not. And he says, there's a problem, guys. There's a problem. And because He uses this illustration, they grow up in a society where most people did some sort of agriculture. Bay Area, most of us have no clue what happens to food and how it happens. It just magically shows up organic, right, at the whatever store that we go to. But they understood how this happened. And so the very fact that when you say the harvest is plentiful, what He's also communicating is it's ready to be harvested. Because when you plant it, it's not at the beginning. It's like right now, guys, right now, it is ripe. It is ready. But they also understand another thing about him saying the harvest is plentiful, and that is, if it doesn't get harvested soon, it will spoil or it will perish. And I think we got to remember that the stakes are people perishing, people ending up far from God. Now remember, I let you off the hook before. I'm not saying if you don't do it, they're going to perish and it's all your fault. What I am saying, though, is that God sees the harvest and he is going to find workers. And the only question is, are you going to be part of that great work or not? And so Jesus notices the harvest, and then he turns their attention to the need, which is laborers for the harvest. And he makes this observation, the workers are few. In other words, we have a lot of work to do, but we don't have enough people to do it. That's the reality of the situation. You know, there's enough to feed, there's enough food for great profit, but it's worth nothing if you don't have enough people out there to harvest it. There's a lot of folks that are far, that are helpless, that are being accosted, and if there's just more harvesters, they can find that hope, they can find that life. And so he says what we need to do. He says, ask the Lord of the harvest. In other words, pray therefore that God, the Father, will send out workers into the harvest field, because God cares about them. Pray that he will send out harvesters. Why? Because bottom line, we need more people to go. We need more people to go. So I want to pause here, and I want to talk to just one person who's kind of sometimes reluctantly, sometimes willingly heeded that call to go. So Eric Wiles, if you'll come on up. Eric has taken several trips. We'll talk about those, including last year we did a trip to Nicaragua. Actually, we did a couple trips. One in particular he went on where we put in a freshwater well. But I'd like to actually start at the very beginning, Eric, and ask, why did you decide to go in the first place?
Yeah, I think the first time I went, I actually, this was back in college, but I think my motivations back then were probably a little selfish. You know, I didn't really go for the right reason. I kind of went on one of these trips because I had a lot of friends who were going. And I was like, well, if they're going to go and I kind of want to, be with them, then sure, I'll go. But I think as I've grown and just learned more in my faith over the years, one of the things that I have come to see is that we've been abundantly blessed here, in the Bay Area. Whether even if we feel like we are not, I think even like the poorest people here in the Bay Area are probably better off than most of the world. If you look at Abraham, early on in Genesis in the Old Testament, where when he entered that covenant relationship with the Lord, he was blessed to be a blessing. And I think for us too, as we have received and God has given us the time, the talent, the resources, the willingness to be able to do these things, and he has blessed us with these things, that we no longer hold on to these blessings and just say, thank you, Lord, I'm going to use this for myself. But we hold on loosely to what we've been given so that we can go and be a blessing to those who are hurting and who are suffering and who don't have frankly, just the basics of things. And as we offer, as we can go down and, as we go out and do these things, and, sometimes we're providing a service and sometimes we're actually building something, which may not necessarily seem like that's a lot, but it's just a small glimmer of the hope and the love that we can give them to show them and to point them to Jesus and point them towards a God who does care for them and who wants to know them on a personal level. So for me, has been my motivation for going the last few trips.
Awesome. And so how many trips have you been on, and where have you gone? I took a while. I had to count kind of, but I've actually been on 9, I guess, short-term missions trips. I did one of them was actually in inner city Pasadena. I spent a summer there. I did 5 trips to the Yucatan Peninsula. I've been to Romania, Haiti, and Nicaragua. Wow. Now that takes a lot of time and resources. So what is it about the experience? I understand the underlying thing of going, but after you went once or twice, you could check that box off. So why do you keep going?
It's a great question. I think as God has been faithful. One of the things that I've just been praying for more and more in my own life is that God would break my heart for the things that break His, and he's been faithful to answer that prayer over the years. And so now, when an opportunity like this arises, I think for a lot of us, we get into this mentality that we have to, unless God is specifically calling us to go, that we're just we wait, and we wait too long, and we miss out on opportunities. And I think I personally know that I went on a lot of these trips feeling like I didn't have a lot to offer, that I didn't have a lot to give. I don't know a lot about construction. It's not easy necessarily for me to be bold and kind of share my faith with people and to share my own broken stories with people. So part of the thing that keeps me coming back is, and doing these trips, repeatedly over the years, is the fact that if an opportunity arises, whether or not I hear God saying you need to go, or like this is the trip for you, if I have the time and if I can take the time off and if I can go, I can't not respond to and try to help when I know that there's people out there who are being abused and who are just broken, who need to hear the truth and need to hear the gospel. Yeah.
Amen. So I think you've already alluded to this, but just to be clear, the harvest is plentiful, including right here in the Bay Area. So what do you get by going rather than just doing it here?
I think a lot of it for me has been, it always sounds kind of weird, the fact that like when we go on these trips, we think that we're actually, and we are, God definitely uses us to reach these people, to reach the lost, to reach the brokenhearted. But I think a lot of times we actually get a lot ourselves on these trips. And for me, one of the things that I obviously, and this may kind of just seem like it goes hand in hand and it doesn't really need to be stated, but I think we get a stronger faith. And one of the things that we've been talking about I think it was week 4 of the Replicating the Discipleship DNA class, for those who were there, was this illustration of a tightrope walker who repeatedly, over and over again, basically walks this tightrope across the Grand Canyon and back, and he does this over and over and over again. This is just picture of Jesus and how we can trust him. And eventually, we see this story of like he's pushing a wheelbarrow and says, "Will you get in? Will you be the one to actually get in and sit in this wheelbarrow as I push you on a tightrope across this canyon and back?" And I think for me, as I have over the years. Initially feeling a little bit reluctant and feeling like, man, that's kind of this is risky. I don't know if I want to go on this trip. But being able to look back at history and see that God is faithful. He's been faithful throughout his word. He's been faithful in my life. He is trustworthy. That one thing that I get out of these trips is just being reminded that, like, oh yeah, what did I have to worry about? God is trustworthy. You were exercising that faith muscle so that when the time comes when we're called to take bigger and bigger and bigger steps of faith, we don't fear, but we trust, and we just step out and we do it. So I think that's one of the big things for me that I get out of it, is just having a faith that is willing to take bigger risks. So
awesome.
Yeah.
So one more question. I just want to see if you had the same experience. I know for me, when I initially started going on some of these trips, we were really focused on what we're going to give, because we went to some really poverty-stricken, needy places. But it always amazed me how much more I got out of it than I gave. And I'm assuming you have a similar experience. If you can just share a little bit about that.
Yeah, like I think I said with the receiving a stronger faith is one thing. One of the things that I've seen as well on these trips is, as I said, I've gone on a lot of them in my own. Feeling inadequate on a lot of these trips, and kind of going like, what do I have to give? What do I have to offer? It was on this Romania trip that I went on back in, I think this was 2007. That was another one of those trips where I kind of went there. We went specifically, I don't know if you know much about the church in Romania, but somehow the Orthodox church there has gotten this totally twisted view of the gospel, that unless you look great and perfect and have everything together on the outside, that unless you have that there is something wrong, that you're not really a Christian. So they always, the church there, the people there are always putting up this totally false front, and it's very, very difficult. They have no concept of just sharing their brokenness with one another and being open and transparent. That is viewed negatively. So I went on one of these trips feeling like I had nothing to give. And when I got there, and I had a kind of a small group of young singles, 20s and 30s, some of them married, some of them not. And the very first thing that God kind of did in my own heart on that trip was said, you need to lead by example. You need to just share your own stories and your own brokenness. And I didn't really think that I was, that was much to offer, much to give, but that kind of started this wave throughout this week of people coming, and just like there was every day we were just shedding tears, crying with one another, and sharing in the stories, and letting God in so that he could begin to heal these people's lives. So I think one of the big things for me that I got out of this trip was, again, just thinking that I didn't have a whole lot to offer. And I think for a lot of us, we think, what can I possibly do? But just being willing and allowing God to use us, and allowing God to use our brokenness, and allowing him to use our stories. I think we all have that. I think we all have that to give and to share. And people can relate to that. People hear that. That is something that I think all of us can identify with. So, I just want to encourage you guys, like I said, a lot of us kind of sit and wait and say, I don't really feel necessarily called to go. But, I'm reminded us, we were in Matthew. Joel was talking in Matthew this morning that in Matthew 24, Jesus says that the end will come when all the nations have heard, right? And I think for me there's hope there. There's a urgency there. And then 4 chapters later, of course, we get the Great Commission where Jesus says to go make disciples of all nations. So obviously God has a heart for the nations. I guess the question is is if you don't have a heart for the nations as well, pray for it, because I didn't. And as I said, as I've prayed for God to give me a heart for the things that break his own, he's been faithful to answer that prayer. Don't necessarily wait for the call. I'd say if you want to see God begin to transform your life, and to be used, and to see, just the amazing ways that God can use us and use our brokenness and use our sharings, or our sufferings, just go. Yeah.
Amen. Would you guys give Eric a hand? Thanks, man. So as a parent, I get this. But Jesus does something a little sneaky here. He sees the opportunity, and then he turns to his disciples and he says, hey guys, man, this is a real problem. Would you pray for it? And so they're like, God, would you send people out? And then the very next verse it says, so Jesus called his 12 disciples to him, and he gave them authority to drive out evil spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. Then it mentions who all the disciples are. And then picking up in verse 5, these 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions, and then it gives them instructions. The key here is that Jesus sent them. Jesus said, this breaks my heart. I want it to break your heart. We have a problem. They go, yes. And he says, pray for God to send people. And they're like, yes. And Jesus says, great. Guess who he's sending? You. And that's kind of what I'm saying is you are the one that Jesus is calling to leave your fingerprints. He's asking you and I to go. For you to go. And I would encourage you to heed that. And like Eric was saying, I would be on the forefront of that rather than the opposite, rather than the other way around. Last week, you remember I told you the story about Jonathan, and he didn't know God's will. He said, maybe God will deliver the enemy in our hand. But remember, he kind of said to his armor bearer, says, this is the thing. If we go over, the enemy has the high ground. And as long as they have the high ground, they have the advantage. And down here, we have the advantage, or at least it's equal advantage. So he says, if they call us up, then we know God's for us. If they don't call us up, if they come down, then we know God's not, and we're going to take off. The interesting thing is they could have did the other way around, which is often what we do. Or I should say it's often what I do, right? So often when maybe this is God's will, this is what I would do. I would say, God, if you really want me to go, then in the next 3 days, we're going to get 3 inches of rain. And if you don't want me to go, then it'll just be dry. That's kind of the way we want this riding in the sky. And I would just challenge you. You know Christ's heart. He has compassion. He sees the world. His heart is broken for it. You know his heart? His heart is more people need to go. And you know the mission he's given us. Anyone who's his disciple, go. Go. So I would challenge you to do the opposite. I'd challenge you to say, hey, God, if you really want me to go, it'll be dry the next 3 days. If you don't want me to go, then we'll get 3 inches of rain. Now, actually, I don't want you to use that illustration because we really need rain. So pick something else. But you understand what I'm saying? And Eric was encouraged, this is God's heart, and you'll be amazed at what he can do. Now, we're not the kind of church where we're going to do this. We're going to show you pictures of starving kids and then, go get them in just emotional frenzy. But we do want to give you an opportunity to respond. So next week, so it's not an emotional frenzy. Next week, you're going to receive this card. It'll be in the bulletin when you come in. If you really want one today, God's spoken. They're in the back on the back table here. But for most of us, next week, and on the back, it will be listed a lot of different goings, Mexico and Nicaragua and some different other trips that we possibly may go on. And you can just check that. The other side, you'll be able to fill out information. Then someone will get a hold of you, and then you'll have the opportunity to respond as God leads. But it's something we want God to move you, rather than this, they need you, kind of a, because we really want you to experience God and his best for your life. We want you to experience his good, perfect, and pleasing will. And when that happens, this is a great thing. When that happens and someone shares, God does a work, and oftentimes he moves a heart, and you are involved in the greatest thing that anyone can be part of on this planet in this lifetime, and that is seeing someone else be born again. You, like me, and like the person on your right and the person on your left, probably feel like, I don't talk well enough. I don't know enough. I'm too shy. I don't have it all together yet. Matter of fact, I'm not even on the way to having half of it together yet. Right? And what I would just tell you is, A, welcome to the club. And B, you're exactly who God likes to use. Because when you do that, right, and this is one of those, what I was saying, Jack went to Nicaragua to give, and his eyes was open to a faith, and he received from folks who probably felt like, those in America, they got it all together, and they show up, and he receives from them. And then the glory goes to God. So my blessing for you is simply that. If you don't know him, I hope your eyes are open up to the one who can bring you hope this week. And if your eyes are open to him, I hope you're blessed with that experience to step out in faith in your weakness, in your awkwardness, in your, I can't believe I said thatness, and see God work in a way that you may bring hope to the hopeless. Go walk in the dust of our Master Jesus Christ. We'll see you all next week. God bless.